Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for April 8th, 2025. Yesterday I was talking about the question of accountability, and I want to continue on this theme because we had a conference call yesterday with a number of fairly influential people discussing how you hold liars accountable and why it's necessary. This is obviously necessary because we face multiple challenges today. The dangers of wars going out of control. We haven't yet solved the problem in Ukraine. Netanyahu's continuing to insist on attacks on Iran, and there's discussion in the Pentagon about war with China. And at the same time, you have the prospect for the collapse of the world economy, depending on what happens in the fight over tariffs, which were initiated by President Trump. So, the thing you have to look at is there is a cause that can be identified behind the war, behind the economic crises, and that is the attempt to preserve a system that no longer works, that may not have ever really worked except for the benefit of the largest corporate cartels in the transatlantic region. But today we're seeing that break down. The debt burden is suffocating corporations. Families can't survive. They can't pay the rent. They can't cover their food costs, healthcare costs. And at the same time, nations are demanding, that is, I should say, the leaders of nations under pressure from the war machine are demanding increased funds directed into military spending for war against a non-existent enemy, namely the idea that Russia is a threat to the entire world. Now, there are some signs of progress. The discussions between the United States and Russia for normalization are really quite promising. The obstacle there, the Europeans, the Ukrainians, and the war hawks that still exist in both parties in the United States. In Europe, there's a drive for a military buildup. Hundreds of billions, over €1 trillion toward military expenditures, very reminiscent of the 1959 comedy movie, The Mouse That Roared. If only Peter Sellers were still alive to portray that puffed up ego, Keir Starmer, in order to show the world how absolutely silly it is for him to talk about a British army leading the coalition of the willing in a war against Russia. Now, one of the other positives, yesterday Netanyahu came to the United States intent on drawing Trump into a war in Iran, and instead Trump changed the subject. He said, we're going to hold direct talks with Iran. He still threatened Iran. He said, if you don't do what we want, you'll pay a price. But the fact that there's an agreement now in principle for direct negotiations to resolve this question, which really doesn't need resolving, the International Atomic Energy Agency already acknowledged, and Tulsi Gabbard acknowledged this also, that Iran is not building a nuclear bomb. So it shouldn't be a problem to resolve this, but it's going to require someone putting a muzzle on Benjamin Netanyahu, who is continuing to push for these wars and is operating on the basis not of Israeli security, but of a war throughout the Middle East to destroy any nation that doesn't submit to the existing rules-based order. And then there's a threat from Trump to China over tariffs. What's China's problem? They're a productive economy. They're able to increase the productivity of labor to drive their costs down, and they're now more than competitive with industry anywhere else in the world, and they're exporting capital goods to help develop their neighbors. Why is that a threat to the United States? Because we stopped doing that. The only thing we're exporting is weaponry and troops deployed to camps and locations all over the world. Now, one additional note on tariff policy. I had a couple of emails from people who were a little confused by what I was saying. And I said that Trump's intention of breaking up the existing world trade system is a good idea, because the World Trade System is the WTO, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and it's oriented toward providing the greatest benefits to the speculative system that's controlled by the largest global corporate cartels. Breaking that up is good for everyone. The question is the use of tariffs. Is that the best way to do it? Because the problem is that to succeed in tariffs, to use them to rebuild the manufacturing sector in the United States, there are two things that are required. One is directed credit available for the manufacturers and entrepreneurs, which we don't have. The Federal Reserve will not do it. It's the Federal Reserve System, which is a system owned by the private banks for their own benefit. That's the problem there, not China, not India, not Indonesia. And the solution for that is LaRouche has proposed a return to the principle of a national bank for development, which was set up initially by the founding fathers under the direction of Alexander Hamilton, not a Federal Reserve, which will never do this. And the second condition is you need technological advance to drive physical economic productivity. And in the U.S., that's stalled out. So confrontation over tariffs will not revive U.S. industry, which is suffering from the policies of the last years, the neoliberal policies that have led to outsourcing, deindustrialization, and incompetent regulation on behalf of the green transformation. So the question then is, what do you do about a situation where you could have a global financial crisis and more wars? Now, what do you do? Well, we had, as I said, a conference call discussion yesterday with some prominent individuals to discuss a strategy for reversing this. And one of the proposals from Ray McGovern was that we need a more aggressive and creative intervention. So one of the things that we're going to do, and this was Helga Zepp-LaRouche's proposal, is draft a statement which states clearly why there's these crises, the war danger, and the fact that these are driven by liars who are acting for private benefit against the security interests not only of the United States, but of every single nation in the world. The corporate cartels don't give a damn about the standard of living in Indonesia or in Ohio. They're committed to increasing their profit ratio, which means cut their costs, which means austerity for the vast majority. And that's what would happen with these tariff policy without adjusting the overall problem. So what we're going to do is draft a statement which essentially says those whose lies have been exposed, lies which have led to wars, destruction, killing, those should be forced to recant, because it's now clear, for example, in Ukraine, it's clear that the biggest lie is that the Russian special military operation was unprovoked. The New York Times, in its own way, on a March 31st article, proved that that's not true, that it was provoked. And there's ample documentation on this. So why do people keep saying it's Putin is the villain, that Russia acted in an unprovoked manner? Well, minimally, the people who have said that must be called on to number one, admit they were wrong, two, apologize for the damage done, and then three, work as hard as they have to promote war to instead promote peace and a new security and development architecture. And even better would be denounce those who have paid them to take these positions. Because a lot of the people who say that Putin acted in an unprovoked manner can't think strategically. In fact, their strategic thinking goes so far as how to cash the check they've been given by the military-industrial complex. So we need full accountability. We need to call these people out, the people in power, demand they tell the truth. And the truth is that these wars are a product not of security for America and Europe, but of profitability for the war manufacturers and their corporate allies. So we're going to get a statement out. We want you to sign it, circulate it. Now, the key, again, is that the economic flank is taking place. The Dmitriev-Vitkov discussion, the Putin-Trump discussion, the fact that the Egyptians have been moving forward with their proposal to rebuild Gaza. There's a lot of potential, the LaRouche Oasis plan, but we've got to clear the decks to shut the liars up. And that's going to require a mobilization of the population. It doesn't need the majority. We've seen from what Jose Vega can do, an individual who knows what he's talking about, he or she's talking about, calling out the liars, has a profound ripple effect throughout the world. And beyond the United States, most of the rest of the world is inclined to disbelieve the lies they're hearing. So if you can combine competent economic policy with demands that the liars admit their lies and renounce them, then we have a chance to pull the world back from the edge of war and depression and begin a rational dialogue on what will provide security and prosperity for the human race. So look for this statement. It should be available within the next 24 to 48 hours. And we have some work to do because the world is definitely worth saving. And there are enough good people around that we can do it.